Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about we've all heard the propaganda lines that the West needs mass migration, and why do we need this mass migration? Well, a shortage of skills. I mean, key skills. We're short of nurses, we're short of doctors, we're short of engineers, and only illiterate third world peasants with an IQ of 80 can solve this shortage. Only them. No one else can do it. So let's have a little look at that, because I came across a white paper or discussion paper from one of the think tanks of the early 1980s in Australia, which has since morphed into really just a full-time cheer squad for mass migration and the Green New Deal and so on. So clearly they were already doing the globalist bidding back in the day, which is about the time, by the way, that Klaus Schwab was sort of, or his handlers were using him as to front the pieces they were putting together, which would become the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. So anyway, they're doing this, and they're talking about these that we're short on nurses, and we're short on doctors, and we're short on engineers, exactly the same shortages that we're supposed to have today. Now, this was 42 years ago. And I remember as a kid sort of reading, some of these stories about shortages, and I thought it was always quite strange back then. Well, how can a first world, rich nation with a vast training infrastructure, how is it possible to be short on these key skills? I mean, if you're short on nurses, then you're not hiring enough nurses, the conditions aren't good enough, or what is it? But it's fixable. Raise the pay, or there are things that can be done. And if there's not enough places, training places, then increase the number of training places, and so on. The same can be said for doctors or engineers. Now, I remember in the early 80s, there was a friend of mine's father was an engineer, and engineers at the time were getting paid, I suppose, about double, like a senior engineer, engineer in charge, that's something, about double the average wage, I suppose, around that, maybe not quite double, but certainly in that vicinity. And so it wasn't huge pay, and there was a brief sort of mid-level mining boom was going on at the time, and that sucked up some engineers going out into the mines and so on. But so people like, say, mechanical engineers, they weren't that well paid. So mechanical engineering companies were finding it hard to get engineers, but they refused steadfastly to again raise pay or conditions or anything like that, and they would stick to a salary level. And if they couldn't get somebody for that sort of money, then fine, they just wait. And that was struck me as odd. I remember sort of hearing about this, some of it secondhand from this friend of mine's father. So anyway, so back in 1980, we're short on nurses and doctors and engineers. Now, that's a long time ago in the training scheme of things. That would easily, with nurses, you could be there'd be 15 to 16 generations of nurses would have been trained and placed in that time, and eight generations of engineer. 7 generations of doctor. So there was ample time to take all sorts of remedial action. But if I look at what the government in Australia and elsewhere around the world, by the way, the Western world was saying, say in 1999, 2000, they were saying, oh, we've got terrible shortages. And where were those shortages? Nurses, doctors, engineers. So the shortages have stayed. Now, if these shortages have been known about for 40 years or more, then why wasn't any action taken? Why would only immigration solve the problem? the economy wasn't growing at a rate where training was improbable or impossible. So clearly, the Western governments have known, or if indeed there was a shortage, I dispute there was. They've known there was a shortage. So really, we're not looking at a shortage at all. Far from it. We're looking at a situation where people wanted to bring people in from lower wage countries to put downward pressure on the wages of engineers, doctors, and nurses. That was what they were doing, and they've been doing it for 40 years, and if not longer. So this claim that there's a shortage is absolute nonsense. It's an absolute brazen falsehood. And there never has been a shortage. And even if there was a shortage, it's something that will be easily, certainly over 40 years, easily remedied by improving conditions and training more people. Now, it's not easy to get nurses, especially the higher quality, more experienced nurses, and knowing a chief executive of one of Australia's premier private hospitals, she was telling me directly that nurses from the third world who had maybe very high level qualifications by third world standards, they would flunk even the most basic entry level nursing test in these upmarket private hospitals. Now, some of them with a short course could get jobs in government hospitals, and they just learn on the go. And some of them just aren't of very high quality, and and you got to wonder about some of them, how they got any jobs at all. And they, on top of not being very good, they don't give a shit. So, but in the private hospitals where people are paying the big bucks to go, then they want the top quality staff and people who are going to give a shit. So the amount of nurses that from the third world who make the grade in these private hospitals are it's very small. You'd be lucky if even 5% of the nurses in these private hospitals are from non-first world countries. So this is a reflection, I think, of that they're bringing these nurses out here not to cover shortages or anything like that at all, but simply to reduce wages, as indeed they're doing with engineers. And to some extent, it's been successful. I was just looking at one of the biggest civil engineering projects in Australia. Now, this is a project that's going to run up to be around 100 billion with a B. This is a big fucking project, and the engineer in charge is only paid $10,000 a year more than the deputy director of diversity at a university. So a deputy director of diversity university only gets paid about the same as the chief engineer. So that'll give you an idea as to how successful they've been in reducing engineer salaries. But the qualifications required to be a chief engineer or something like that is at least 7 years at university and at least 20 to 25 years on the job. And whereas this director of diversity needs only be an ideological flunky goon to get the same sort of money. And the reason they're being rewarded so handsomely is because they're pushing and supporting and furthering the globalist agenda. And for that, they're being paid handsomely. The engineers just doing a real job. Why should they be paid well? So my just summing up here is I don't think there's ever been a shortage of these people, in these areas or others for that matter. The nursing, the doctors, and the engineers, they're just being imported and being used to reduce wages. There are some medical centres in Australia now where there is not a single white doctor working, and every one of the doctors in the practice is from the third world and does not speak English well enough to be able to understand complicated medical issues. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.